The Janeites by Rudyard Kipling. In the Lodge of Instruction, attached to Faith and Works No 5837 E Roman 100, which has already been described Saturday afternoon, was appointed for the weekly cleanup, when all visiting brethren were welcome to help under the direction of the lodge officer of the day. Their reward was light refreshment and the meeting of companions. This particular afternoon, the autumn of 20 Brother Burgess P. Roman 1000 was on duty, and finding a strong shift present took advantage of it to strip and dust all hangings and curtains to go over every inch of the pavement which, with stone not floorcloth behand, and to polish the columns jewels working outfit and organ. I was given to clean some officers' jewels beautiful bits of old Georgian silverwork, humanized by generations of elbow grease and, retired to the organ loft for the floor was like the quarterdeck of a battleship on the eve of a ball half a dozen brethren, had already made the pavement as glassy as the aisle of Greenwich Chapel, the brazen chapiters winked like pure gold at the flashing marks on the chairs, and a morose one-legged brother was attending to the emblems of mortality with, I think, rouge. They ought he volunteered to Brother Burgess, as PG 125, we passed to be betwixt the color of ripe apricots and a half-smoked meerschaum. That's how we kept 'em in my mother lodge a treat to look at. I've never seen Spatambulus to touch this, I said. Wait till you see the organ, Brother Burgess replied. You could shave in it when they've done. Brother Anthony's in charge up there, the taxi owner. You met here last month. I don't think you've come across Brother Humberstall, have you? I don't remember, I began. You wouldn't have forgotten him if you had. He's a hairdresser, now somewhere at the back of Ebury Street. Was garrison artillery blown up twice? Does he show it, I asked, at the foot of the organ loft stairs? Knew not much more than Lazarus. Did I expect Brother Burgess fled off to set someone else to a job? Brother Anthony, small, dark, and humpbacked, was hissing groom fashion, while he treated the rich acacia wood panels of the lodge organ, with some sacred secret composition of his own, under his guidance Humberstall, an enormous flat-faced man carrying the shoulders, ribs, and loins of the old Mark 14 Royal Garrison Artillery, and the eyes of a bewildered retriever, rubbed the stuff, and I sat down to my task on the organ bench, whose purple velvet cushion was being vacuum cleaned on the floor below. Now, said Anthony, after 5 minutes vigorous work on the part of Humberstall, now, we're gettin' something worth lookin' at. Take it easy and go on, with what you was tellin' me about that Macklin man. I adn't anything against I said Humberstall, except he'd been a toff by birth. But that never showed till he was Bosco Absoluto, mere bane drunk, PG 126 Ani, made a common ound of Roman 999. But when Bosco it all came out otherwise, he showed me my duties as mess waiter very well on the ole. Yes, yes, but what in L made you go back to your circus? The board gave you down and out fair enough, you said, after the dump went up at Eatables. Bored or no board, I hadn't the nerve to stay at home, not with mother chuckin' herself round all 3 rooms like a rabbit. Every time, the Gothas tried to get Victoria and sister. Written me aunt's 4 pages about it, next day not for me thank you, till the war was over. So I slid out with a draft thee wasn't particular in 17, so long, as the tally was correct, and I joined up again with our circus somewhere at the back of Lar Pugnoy. I think it was Humberstall paused for some seconds, and his brow wrinkled, then I went sick, or somethin' or other they told me, but I know when I reported for duty our battery sergeant major says that I wasn't expected back on, and one thing lead into another too. Cut a long story short, I went up before our major I shall forget my own name next major. Never mind, Anthony interrupted, go on it'll come back and talk. Alpha mo twas on the tip o' my tongue then. Humberstall dropped the polishing cloth and knitted his brows again in most profound thought. Anthony turned to me and suddenly launched into a sprightly tale of his taxi's collision with a marble arch refuge on a greasy day after a 3-yard skid. Much damage, I asked. Oh no, every bolt and screw and nut on the chassis strained, but nothing carried away, you understand me, and not a scratch on the body. You'd never ave guessed a thing wrong till you took in hand. It was a whop PG 127 2 Eden like this, and he slapped his tactful little forehead to show what a knock it had been. Did your major dish you up much? He went on over his shoulder to Humberstall, who came out of his abstraction with a slow heave. Will, he told me I wasn't expected back, either, and he said, he couldn't 'ang up the ole circus, till id rejoined, and he said that my 10-inch Skoda, which id been number 3 of before the dump went up at Eatables, had full crowd, but he said as soon as a casualty occurred he'd remember me meantime. Says he, I particularly want you for actin' mess waiter. Beggin' your pardon, sir, I says perfectly respectful, but I didn't exactly come back for that, sir. Beggin' your pardon, Umberstall, says but I append to command the circus now you're a sharp-witted man, he says, and what we've suffered from fool waiters in mess, has been something cruel y'all take on from no under instruction to Macklin air. So this man Macklin that I was tellin' you about showed me my duties amick I've got it amick, was our major and Moss was Captain Humberstall, celebrated his recapture of the name, by laboring at the organ panel on his knee. Look out y'all smash it, Anthony protested. Sorry mothers often told me, I didn't know my strength now here's a curious thing, this major of our sits all common back to Muas, a high-up divorce court lawyer and Moss our captain, was number 10 Moss's private detective agency. You've heard of it wives watched, while you wait and so on well, these two ad been registerin' together so too. Speak in the civil line for years on end, but hadn't ever met till the war consequently at mess their talk, was mostly PG 128 about famous cases, they'd been mixed up in amick, told the law court's end o' the business, and all what had been left out of the pleadins, and Moss, add the actual facts, concernin' the errand partisan hotels and so on. I've heard better talk in our mess than ever before, or since it comes o' the gunners bane a scientific corps. That be damned, said Anthony, if anythin' appends to they've got it all down in a book. There's no book when your Laurie dies on you in the Ollie land that's brains. Well then, Humberstall continued, come on this secret society business that I started tellin' you about. When those two Amick and Moss'd finished about their matrimonial relations, and mind you, they weren't radishesly seldom, or ever repeated, they'd begin as often as not on this secret society woman, I was tellin' you off thy's Jane. She was the only woman I ever eared say a good word for cordon to them Jane. Was a none such I didn't know then she was a society fact, is I only ung out arf an ear in their direction. At first, on account of Bain, under instruction for mestody to this. Macklin man, what drew my attention to her, was a new lieutenant joinin' up, we called Gander. On account of his profile, which was the identical bird Ed been an actuary workin' out 'ow long civilians add to live, neither Amick, nor Moss wasted words on at mess. They went on talking as usual, and in due time, as usual they got back to Jane Gander Cox, one of his big chilblainy ears, and cracks his cold finger joints. By God, Jane, says yes Jane, says Amick pretty short and senior. Praise even, says Gander, it was bubbly where I've come from down the line, some damn review or other, I expect. Well, neither Amick nor Moss was PG 129 easy-mouthed, or for that matter mealy-mouthed, but no sooner had Gander passed that remark than they both shook, and with the young squirt across the table, and called for the port back again. It was a password all right, then they went at it about Jane all three regardless of rank, that made me listen presently, I eared Amick say. Arfamo Anthony cut in, but what was you doin' in mess? Me and Macklin was refixin' the sandbag screens to the dugout passage, in case, oh gas, we never knew when we'd cop it in the EVs, don't you see? But we knew we had been looked for some time, and it might come any minute. But as I was sayin', Amick says what a pity 'twas Jane ad died barren I deny, that says Moss I maintain. She was fruitful in the iggest sense, oh the word, and Moss knew about such things too. I am inclined to agree with Amick, says young Gander, anyhow she's left no direct and lawful progeny. I remember every word they said on account o' what appends subsequently. I hadn't noticed Macklin much, or id ha seen, he was Bosco absoluto. Then he cut and lean in over a packing case with a face on like a dead mackerel in the dark. Pardon me, gents. Macklin says, but this is a matter on which I do append to be moderately well informed. She did leave lawful issue in the shape o' one son, and his name was Enery James. By what sire prove it, says Gander, before, is senior officers could get in a word. I will, says Macklin's surgeon on his two thumbs, and mark you none of 'em spoke, I forget, whom he said was the sire of this Enery Jamesman. But he delivered him a lecture on this Jane woman, for more than a quarter PG 130 of an hour. I know the exact time, because my old Skoda was on duty at 10-minute intervals reachin', after some Jerry Foreman up area, and her blast always put out the dugout candles. I relit 'em once and again at the end. In conclusion, this Macklin fell flat forward on his face, which was how he generally wound up his notion of a perfect day Bosco absolute. Take I am away, says Amick to me, he's sufferin' from shell shock. To cut a long story short, that was what first put the notion into my eed, wouldn't it? You even add Macklin been a ighup mason. Wasn't he, then, said Anthony, a little puzzled. Ed never gone beyond the blue degrees, he told me. Anyhow, Ed lectured his superior officers up and down. Ed, as good as called fools most o' the time in his toff's voice. I eared and I saw Roman 999, and all he got was me told off to put to bed. And all on account, oh Jane, would you have let a thing like that get past you nor me either next mornin'? When his stomach was settled, I was at him fulcry to find out how it was worked toff, or no toff, he knew his end of a bargain. First, he wasn't talkin', any he said I wasn't fit to be initiated into the society of the Janeites, that only meant 5 bob more 15 up to date. Make it 1 Bradbury, he says it's dirt cheap. You saw me old the circus in the hollow of me, and no denyin' it, I add so for £1. He communicated me the password of the first degree, which was tilnes and trapdoors. I know what a trapdoor is, I says to I.M., but what in L's tilnes? You obey orders, E says, and next time I ask you what you're a thinkin' about, y'all answer tilnes and PG 131 trapdoors. In a smart and soldierly manner, ill spring that question at me own time, all you've got to do is to be distinct. We settled all this while we was skinnin' spuds for dinner at the back o' the rear truck, under our camouflage screens. God, ow that glue paint did stink, otherwise 'twasn't so bad with the sun comin' through our pantomime leaves and the wind marcelling the grasses in the cutting, well, one thing, leading to another, nothin' further append in this direction. Till the afternoon, we 'ad a high standard o' livin' in Messin. In the group, for that matter, I was talkin' away Moss's lunch dinner. E would never call itin Moss was fillin' is cigarette case previous to the afternoon's duty. Macklin in the passage common in, as if he didn't know Moss was their slings' question at me, and I give the countersign in a low, but quite distinct voice, Mackin. As if I hadn't seen Moss. Moss looked at me through and through with his cigarette case in his, and then E jerks out arf a dozen bis Turkishin, the table and exits. I pinched em and divid with Macklin. You see 'ow it works, says Macklin. Could you ave invested a Bradbury to better advantage? So far no, I says, otherwise, though if they start provin' and tryin' me, I am a dead bird. There must be a lot more to this Janate game. Eeps and eeps, he says, but to show you the sort of eart I ave ill, communicate you all the igger degrees among the Janeites, includin' the charges for another Bradbury, but y'all ave to work Dobbin. Pretty free with your Bradburys, wasn't you? Anthony grunted disapprovingly. What odds, actually, Gander told us. We couldn't expect to average more than 6 weeks longer apiece, and PG 132 anyhow. I never regretted it, but make no mistaketh, preparation was something cruel in the first place. I come under Macklin for direct instruction, Ray Jane. Oh, Jane was real. Then Anthony glanced for an instant at me. As he put the question, I couldn't quite make that out. Real. Humberstall's voice rose almost to a treble. Jane, why, she was a little old maid who'd written Alf a dozen books about 100 years ago. Twasn't as if there was anything to em, either. I know I had to read em. They weren't adventurous nor smutty, nor what you'd call even interestin' all about girls o' 17. They begun young. Then, I tell you, not certain whom they'd like to marry, in their dances and card parties and picnics, and their young blokes goin' off to London on 'orseback. For haircuts and shaves, it took a full day in those days. If you went to a proper barber, they wore wigs too, when they was chemists or clergymen. All that interested me on account o' me profession, and cuttin' the men's 'air. Every fortnight Macklin used to chip me about bane and hairdresser. E could pass remarks too. Humberstall recited with relish a fragment of what must have been a superb combination service, ending with you lazy-minded, lousy-headed, long-trousered, perfumed perruquier. And you took it. Anthony's quick eyes ran over the man. Yes, I was after my money's worth, and Macklin havin' put is, and to the plow wasn't one to withdraw it otherwise. If id pushed I.M., id ha slew Roman 999, our battery sergeant major, nearly Roman 999. For Macklin had a wonderful way o' passing remarks on a man's civil life, and he put it about that our B.S. Roman 1000 had run a dope PG 133 and dollar shop with a Chinese woman, the wrong end o' Southwark Bridge. Nothin' you could lay old of o' course. But Humberstall let us draw our own conclusions. That reminds me, said Anthony, smacking his lips. I 'ad a bit of a fracas with a fare in the Fulham Road last month. He called me a parasitic forder. I informed I.M. I was owner-driver, and E could see for himself. The cab was quite clean. That didn't suit Roman 999. E said it was crawlin'. What happened? I asked. One o' them blue-billed bolshies of post-war police, Negelton point duty, as usual, asked us to flirt a little quieter. My joker chucked some Arabic at Roman 999. That was when we signed the armistice. Ed been a Yomana parishin, Gloucestershire yeoman that id helped gather in the orange crop with at Jaffa in the Ali land. And after that, I continued. It 'ud be 'ard to say I know 'e lived at Hendon, or Cricklewood I drove I am, there, we must ave talked Zionism or something, because at 7 next mornin', him and me was tryin' to get petrol out of a milk shop at St. Albans they adn't any in lots, oh ways this war has been a public nuisance, as one might say, but there's no denyin' it helps you slip through life, easier the dairyman's son, ad done time on Jordan with camels, so he stood us rum and milk. Just like Avin the password A was Humberstall's comment. That's right ours was Im Shekelb, 3 not so ard to remember as your Jane stuff. Jane wasn't so very ard not the way Macklin used PG 134 to put her Humberstall. Resumed I add only 6 books to remember I learned the names by ear. As Macklin placed M. There was one called Persuasion first and the rest in a bunch, except another about some abbey or other last by 3 lengths. But as I was sayin' what beat me was there was nothin' to M, nor in M, nothin' at all believe me. You seem good and full of M anyhow said Anthony. I mean that characters was no use. They was only just like people you run across any day. One of em was a curateth Reverend Colin Salways, on the make and look into Mary Money well. When I was a Boy Scout I am, or his twin brother was our troop leader. And there was an upstandin' ard-mouthed duchess or a baronet's wife that didn't give a curse for anyone who wouldn't do what she told em to the lady. Catherine ill get it in a minute to bug before ma bought the hairdressin' business in London. I used to know of an wholesale grocer's wife near Leicester. I am Leicestershire myself. That might ave been duplicate ando yester. Was a Miss Bates, just an old maid runnin', about like a hen with eed, cut off and her tongue loose at both ends. I've got an aunt like good as gold but you know. Lord yes said Anthony, with feeling and did you find out what Tilna's meant I am always huntin', after the meanin' of things myself. Yes, E was a swine of a major general retired. And on the make there a all on the make in a quiet way in Jane. E was so much of a gentleman by his own estimation, that E was always beavin' like a hound, you know the sort turned a girl out of his own ooze. Because she hadn't any money after mark you encouragin' PG 135 to set cap at his son, because E thought she had. But that appends all the time said Anthony. Why me own mother? That's right so would mine but this Tilney was a man, and somehow Jane put it down also naked. It made you ashamed I told Macklin, that and he said I was shappen to be a good Janate twasn't his fault. If I wasn't nother thing too avin been, at the Bath Mineral Waters Hospital, in 16 with trench feet was a great advantage to me, because I knew the names o' the streets where Jane ad lived there, was one of 'em Laura I think, or some other girl's name which Macklin said, was Ollie Ground if you've been initiated. Then he says you'd have felt your flat feet tingle every time you walked over those sacred pavin stones. My feet tingled right enough I said, but not on account of Jane, nothin' remarkable about that I says. Even lend me patience he says combin is air with his little hands, every damn thing about Jane is remarkable to a pucka Janate. It was there he says that Miss What's Your Name he had the name, I've forgotten, it made up engagement again, after 9 years with Captain T'other Bloke, and he dished me out a page and a half of one of the books to learn by ear persuasion, I think it was. You quick at gettin' things off by ear Anthony demanded. Not as a rule I was then though or else Macklin knew to deliver the charges properly said Ed, been some sort o' schoolmaster once, and he make my mind, resume work, or break himself, that was just before the battery sergeant major. Added in for him on account o' what he'd been sayin' about the Chinese wife in the dollar shop. PG 136. What did Macklin really say Anthony, and I asked together Humberstall, gave us a fragment, it was hardly the stuff to let loose on a pious post-war world without revision. And what had your B.S. Roman 1000 been in civil life? I asked at the end. Edenbaumer to an wholesale undertaker in the Midlands said Humberstall, but o' course when he thought he saw his chance, he naturally took it he came along one mornin' lickin', is lips you don't get past me this time, he says to Macklin you're for it professor. Ow so me gallant major says Macklin and what for? For written obese words on the breech o' the 10-inch, says the B.S. Roman 1000, she was our old Skoda, that I've been tellin' you about we called Bloody Eliza. She 'ad a badly wore obturator and blew, through a fair treat I knew by Macklin's face. The B.S. Roman 1000 ad dropped it somewhere, but all he vouchsafed was very good major we will consider it in common room. The B.S. Roman 1000 couldn't ever stand Macklin's toff's way o' puttin' things. So he goes off rumblin' like L's bells in an hurricane, as the Marines say. Macklin put it to me at once what had I been doin' somehow. He could read me like a book. Well, all I donian I told I am, he was responsible for it was to chalk the guns amic. Never minded what the men wrote up on said it gave him an interest in their job. You'd see all sorts of remarks chalked on the side plates or the gearkasins. What sort of remarks, said Anthony keenly. Oh, ow bloody Eliza, or spittin' Jimthat, was our old mark 5 9.woeful, that morning PG, 137 and such things. But it 'ad come over me more to please Macklin than anything else that. It was time we Janeites 'ad a look in so, as I was tellin' you id taken and rechristened all three of 'em on my own, early, that mornin' spittin' Jim, I 'ad chalked the Reverend Collins that curate I was tellin' you about in our cut-down Navy 12 General Tilney because it was worse war in the groovin' than anything I'd ever seen the Skoda, and that was where I dropped it. I 'ad chalked up the Lady Catherine de Bug. I made a clean breast of it all to Macklin. He reached up and patted me on the shoulder. You done nobly, he says. You're a bringin' forth abundant fruit like a good Janate. But I'm afraid your spellin' has misled our worthy B.S. Roman 1000. That's what it is, he says, slappin' his little leg. 'Ow might you ave spelt de Berg, for example? I told Roman 999, twasn't right, and nips off to the Skoda. To make it so, when comes back, says that the gander 'ad been before I am and corrected the error. But we two come up before the major, just the same that afternoon after lunch amic in the chair, so to speak Moss in another, and the B.S. Roman 1000 chargin' Macklin, with written obese words on his Majesty's property on active service. When it transpired that me and not Macklin was the offendin' party, the B.S. Roman 1000 turned his hand in, and sulked like a baby. As good as told amic, couldn't hope to preserve discipline, unless examples was made meanin' o' course Macklin. Yes, I've heard all that, said Anthony with a contemptuous grunt. The worst of it is a lot of it's true. Amick took I am up sharp about military law, which he said was even more fair than the civilian article. PG 138. My God, this came from Anthony's scornful midmost bosom. According to the unwritten law of the EVs, says Amick, there's no objection to the men chalkin' the guns, if decency is preserved on the other. And says he, we haven't yet settled the precise status of individuals entitled, so, to do I hold that the privilege is confined to combatants only. With the permission of the court, says Moss, who was another born lawyer, id like to be allowed to join issue on that point. Prisoner's position is very delicate and doubtful, and he has no legal representative. Very good, says Amick. Macklin Bain acquitted. With submission, me lud, says Moss, I hope to prove was accessory before the fact. As you please, says Amick, but in that case, the L's goin' to get the port. I am tryin' to stand the court. I submit, says Moss. Prisoner Bain, under direct observation, the court could be temporarily enlarged for that duty. So Macklin went and got it, and the B.S. Roman 1000 had his glass with the rest. Then they argued whether mess servants and non-combatants was entitled to chalk the guns. Amick versus Moss, after a bit Amick, as Roman 100 give himself best in me, and Macklin was severely admonished for trespassing on combatants' rights, and the B.S. Roman 1000 was warned that if we repeated the offense could deal with us summarily. He 'ad some glasses o' port and went out quite 'appy. Then my turn come, while Macklin was getting them their tea, and one thing lead into another. Amick put me through all the Janate PG 139 degrees. You might say never 'ad such a doin' in my life. Yes, but what did you tell em, said Anthony. I can't ever think my lies quick enough when I am for it. No need to lie, I told him that the backside view o' the Skoda, when she was run up, put Lady de Bug into my eed. They gave me right there. But they said I was wrong about General Tilney. Cordon to them, our Navy 12-inch ought to ave been christened Miss Bates. I said the same idea 'ad crossed my mind, till I'd seen the General's groovin'. Then I felt it had to be the General or nothin'. But they give me full marks for the Reverend Collins, 9 point. And you fed em that sort o' talk. Anthony's fox-colored eyebrows climbed almost into his hair. While I was assistin' Macklin to get tea seein', it was an examination. I wanted to do I am credit as a Janate. Onan, what did they say? They said it was igly creditable to us both. I don't drink, so they give me about 100 fags. God, what a circus you must ave been, was Anthony's gasping comment. It was a 'appy little group. I wouldn't 'a' changed with any other. Humberstall sighed heavily as he helped Anthony slide back the organ panel. We all admired it in silence while Anthony repocketed his secret polishing mixture, which lived in a tin tobacco box. I had neglected my work for listening to Humberstall. Anthony reached out quietly and took over a secretary's jewel and a rag. Humberstall studied his reflection in the glossy wood. PG 140. Almost, he said critically, holding his head to one side. Not with an army, you could with a safety, though, said Anthony. And indeed, as Brother Burgess had foretold, one might have shaved in it with comfort. Did you ever run across any of 'em afterwards? Any time, Anthony asked presently. Not so many of 'em left to run after now. With the Evies, it's mostly neck, or nothin', we copped it in the neck in due time. Well, you come out of it all right, Anthony spoke both stoutly and soothingly, but Humberstall would not be comforted. That's right, but I almost wish I had, he sighed. I was appear there than ever before or since Jerry's march push in 18 did us, and yet 'ow could we ave expected it? 'Ow could we ave expected it we'd been sent back, for rest and run and repairs back pretty near our base, and our old loco, that used to shift us about nights shed gone down the line for repairs. But for Amick, we wouldn't even ave add our camouflage screens up. He told our brigadier that whatever E might be in the gunnery line as a lead-in divorce lawyer, he never threw away a point in argument, so E 'ad us all screened in over in a cuttin' on a little spur line, near a wood, and E saw to the screens himself. The leaves weren't more than common out then, and the sun used to make our gloopint stink, just like actin' in a theater it was, but 'appy I expect if we'd been caterpillars like the new big 6-inch, how's they'd ha remembered us. But we was the old law bassy 15 Mark O heavies, that ran on rails not much more good than scrapyern that late in the war, and believe me genser brethren, as I should say, copped it cruel look. PG 141 air. It was in the afternoon, and I was watching Gander instruct in a class in new sights at Lady Catherine, all of a sudden I eared our screens rip overhead, and a runner on a motorbike come sailin' through the air like that bloke that used to bicycle off Brighton Pier End. Landed one awful whop, almost atop the class. Old Ard, says Gander, that's no way to report. What's the fuss, your screens ave broke my back for one thing, says the bloke on the ground. And for another, the old front's gone nonsense, says Gander. E 'adn't more than passed the remark. When the man was violently sick and conked out, E 'ad plenty papers on IM from brigadiers, and Roman 100 O's reporting themselves cut off and askin' for orders. E was right both way, she's back, and our front, the old Somme front, washed out as clean as kissmeaned, his huge hand smashed down open on his knee. We eared about it at the time in the Ollie land. Was it really as quick as all that, said Anthony. Quicker look air, the motorbike dropped in on us about 4 pipema. After that we tried to get orders o' some kind or other. But nothing came through except that all available transport was in use, and not likely to be released. That didn't help us any. About 9 o'clock comes along a young brass in brown gloves. We was quite a surprise to Roman 999 E, said they were evacuating the area and we'd better shift, where to, says Amick rather short. Oh, somewhere Amiens way, he says, not that id guarantee Amiens for any length o' time, but Amiens might do to begin with. I am giving you the very words. Then E goes off swingin' his brown gloves, and Amick sends for Gander, and orders IM to march the men through Amiens to Deep Book, thence to Neuven. PG 142, take up positions Bain, Seaford and carry on the war. Gander said ed see I am damned. First Amick says ed see I am court-martialed, after Gander says what he meant to say was that the men ud see all and sundry damned before they went into Amiens, with their gun sights wrapped up in their putties. Amick says he hadn't said a word about putties and carrion. Off the gun sights was purely optional. Well, anyhow, says Gander, putties or drawers, they ain't going to shift a step, unless you lead the procession. Mutinous ounds, says Amick, but we live in a democratic age, Diu. Suppose they'd object to kindly diggin' themselves. In a bit not at all, says Gander. The BS Roman 1000s kept them at it like terriers for the last 3 hours, that Bain, so says Amick Maclinlow. Now, fetch a small glasses o' port. Then Moss comes and he could smell port a mile. Often he submits we'd only add to the congestion in Amiens, if we took our crowd there. Whereas if we lay doggo where we was, Jerry might miss us, though he didn't seem to be missin' much that evenin'. The old country was pretty noisy, and our dumps we'd lit ourselves. Flarin' heavens high as far as you could see lyin' doggo was our best chance, I believe. We might ha' pulled it off if we'd been left alone. But along towards midnight there was some small stuff swishin' about, but nothin' particular. A nice little bald-headed old gentleman in uniform pushes into the dugout whippin' his glasses and sayin' he was thinkin' o' formin' a defensive flank on our left with his battalion which 'ad just come up. Amick says he wouldn't form much if he was Roman 999. Oh, don't say that, says the old gentleman, very shocked. One must support the guns, mustn't one? Amick says we was refittin' and about as effective, just PG 143. Then, as a public lavatory go into Amiens, he says, and defend 'em there. Oh, no, says the old gentleman, me and my laddies must make a defensive flank for you, and he flips out of the dugout like a performin' bullfinch chirrupin for his laddies. God and even knows what sort o' push they was little boys mostly, but they 'ung on to is coattails like a Sunday school treat, and we eared 'em muckin' about in the open for a bit. Then a pretty tight barrage was slapped down for 10 minutes, and Amick thought the laddies had copped it already. It'll be our turn next, says Moss. There's been a covey o' Gothas messin' about for the last four lookin' for the railway shops, I expect. They're just as likely to take us 'Arrison out that says Amick. One of 'em sounds pretty low down now. Were for it me learned colleagues, Jesus, says Gander, I believe you're right, sir. And that was the last word I eared on the matter. Did they cop you then, said Anthony. They Roman 999. I expect Moss was right, and they took us for the railway shops. When I come to, I was lyin' outside the cut-in, which was pretty well filled up. The Reverend Collins was all right, but Lady Catherine and the General was past prayin', for I lay there talkin' it in till I felt cold. And I looked at myself, otherwise I 'adn't much on except me boots, so I got up and walked about to keep warm. Then I saw something like a mushroom in the moonlight. It was the nice old gentleman's bald ead. I patted it, and his laddies 'ad copped it right enough. Some battalion run out in a hurry from England, I suppose. They 'adn't even begun to dig in, poor little perishers. I dressed myself off there, and topped off with a British warm. Then I went back to the cut-in, and someone says to me, dig you ox, dig PG 144 ganders under, so I 'elped shift things till I threw up blood and bile. Mixed then I dropped, and they brought Gander out dead and laid next me. Amick 'ad gone too fair to an Alf. The BS Roman 1000 said, but the funny thing was he talked quite a lot before he died, and nothin' to below his stomach. They told me Moss we never found Ed been standing by Lady Catherine. Shed appended and gone back on with Alf the cut-in atop of by the look of things. And what come to Macklin, said Anthony. Dunno, was with Amick, I expect. I must ha' been blown clear of all by the first bomb, for I was the only Janet left. We lost about half our crowd, either under or after wed. Got him out. The BS Roman 1000 went off his rocker when mornin' came, and he ran about from one to another sayin' that was a good push. That was a great crowd. Did ye ever know any push to touch 'em? And then Ed cry, so what was left of us made off for ourselves, and I came across a lorry pretty full. But they took me in. Ah, said Anthony with pride, they all take a taxi when it's rainin'. Ever eared that song? They went a long way back. Then I walked a bit, and there was a hospital train fillin' up, and one of the sisters, sa grey-headed ownerin, at me wavin' red, and's in sayin' there wasn't room for a louse in it. I was past carin'. But she went on talkin', and talkin' about the war, and her pa and Ladbroke Grove, and 'ow strange for at time of life to be doin' this work with a lot o' men, and next war 'ow the nurses 'ud ave to wear khaki breeches on account o' the mud like the land girls, and that reminded shed boil me an egg if she could lay. And's on one for shed run a chicken farm. Once you never eared anything like I'd outside o' Jane. It set me PG 145 off laughin' again. Then a woman with a nose and teeth on marched up. What's all this, she says. What do you want? Nothing, I says, only make Miss Bates there stop talkin', or ill die Miss Bates. She says, what an even's name makes you call that because she is, I says, die you know, what you're sayin', she says, and slings her bony arm round me to get me off the ground course. I do, I says, and if you knew Jane you'd know too. That's enough, says she, you're common on this train. If I have to kill a brigadier for you, and she, and an ordly fare hove me into the train on, to a stretcher close to the cookers. That beef dia went down well. Then she shook hands with me and said I'd hit off Sister Molyneux in one, and then she pinched me an extra blanket. It was own hospital pretty much, I expect. She was the Lady Catherine de Bourgh of the area. Well, and so, to cut a long story short, nothing further transpired. Hadn't you 'ad enough by then, asked Anthony. I expect so, otherwise if the old circus 'ad been carryin' on, I might ave add another turn with before armistice. Our BS Roman 1000 was right. There never was a peer push Amick and Moss and Gander, and the BS Roman 1000, and that poor little Macklinman mackin' and passin' and raisin' me and get me on to the hospital train after was dead all for a couple of Bradburys. I lie awake nights still reviewing matters. There never was a push to touch or snever. Anthony handed me back the secretary's jewel resplendent. Ah, said he, no denyin' that Jane business was more useful to you than the Roman eagles or the Star and Garter. Pity there wasn't any of you Janeites in the Ollie land. I never come across PG 146. Well, as poor Macklin said, it's a very select society, and you've got to be a Janate in your ear, or you won't have any success, and yet, he made me a Janate. I read all her 6 books now for pleasure tween times in the shop, and it brings it all back down to the smell of the glue paint on the screens. You take it from me, brethren, there's no one to touch Jane when you're in a tight place, God bless her, whoever she was. Worshipful brother Burgess from the floor of the lodge called us all from labor to refreshment. Humberstall hove himself up so very a cart horse of a man, one almost expected to hear the harness creak on his back end, descended the steps. He said he could not stay for tea, because he had promised his mother to come home for it, and she would most probably be waiting for him now at the lodge door. One or other of em always comes for Roman 999. He's apt to miss his gears, sometimes Anthony explained to me as we followed. Goes on a bust, do you mean? I am he's no more touched liquor than as women since was born. No e's liable to a sort o' quiet fits like they came on, after the dump blew up at Eatables. But for them, Ed ha been battery sergeant major. Oh, I said I couldn't make out why he took on as mess waiter, when he got back to his guns. That explains things a bit. His sister told me the dump goin' up knocked all his gunnery instruction clean out of Roman 999. The only thing he stuck to was to get back to his old crowd. God knows how he worked it. But Roman 999 he fair deserted out of England to M. She says, and when they saw the state was in, they adn't the eart to send IM back or into PG 147 hospital. They kept IM for a mascot, as you might say. That's all dead true, his sister told me so, but I can't guarantee that Janate business, except he never told a lie since he was 6. His sister told me so. What do you think? He isn't likely to have made it up out of his own head, I replied. But people don't get so crazy fond o' books, as all that do they ease made. His sister tried to read M. Shed do anything to please him, but as I keep tellin' sod, his mother diu a pen to know anything about Jane. I believe Jane was a bit of a matchmaker in a quiet way when she was alive, and I know all her books are full of matchmaking. I said you'd better look out. Oh, that's as good as settled, Anthony replied, blushing. PG 148.